Okay, so I want to talk about the seven ancient wonders of the world. Before I continue, I've tested this a few times and I'm aware that the volume is not wonderful. So for this video, you'll need to put your volume to its top level. I am sorry for that. I really don't understand the problem because there have been improvement with these headphones, but for some reason it seems to have went back to the not very great way it was before. I'm going to go in ahead and make this video for the purpose of posterity. And like I say, if it improves in the future, I might remake these videos, possibly. We'll see what happens. Anyway, the subject of history and archaeology has always fascinated me. Um, right back to childhood. I remember as a child, I was really into the Indiana Jones series, with Harrison Ford, of course, in the lead role. I loved that series to the point where I wanted my mother as a child to buy me the fedora and the bullwhip. I was really into it, and I still love those films. I still think they're very. I think one thing about the Indiana Jones series, and I'll just I won't say too long on this point, but I think one reason why they were very successful is because Harrison Ford was absolutely perfect at the role. I find that some action films try to throw in a little bit too much comedy. With the Indiana Jones series, there were light-hearted moments, but it also was done in such a way so as they focus more on the action aspect. There's other sort of action films that I think try to put a bit too much humor in it, and that sometimes leads to issues with I don't know, it just doesn't always work for me. So, for example, the Mummy series, again, it was very good, but it didn't quite have the same appeal to me as Indiana Jones because I think they tried to be too funny at points, just tried to mix it up a bit too much, and I'm not sure if that always works. Nevertheless, a good series. Okay, so I've been doing research on ancient Egypt, and it's truly staggering just how far that civilization goes back. In terms of cradle of civilization, it's generally seen actually to be the Sumerians. The basis being that the first writing is said to date from the city of Uruk in what is now modern day Iraq. But it's sort of a tie up between Sumer and Egypt. If we assume the first pharaoh to be Narmer, that goes back to 3100 BC, which is now 5,000 years ago. 5,100 years ago truly is a staggering length of time in terms of civilization. Of course, there's many, many cultures over the world that predate that. But the difference between a culture and a civilization is that with a culture, you get people involved in sophisticating um, lifestyle, for example, agriculture, um, animal husbandry, that sort of thing. With civilization, I think the definition needs to lie in when you start seeing the development of complex urban structures, cities, political structure, leadership hierarchy. This is when we start seeing what is rightly or wrongly deemed as civilization. So Egypt is certainly a contender for the oldest. Um, but the ancient Near East, there's certainly places there that date beyond even the Iron Age. I mean, Damascus and Aleppo are two of the oldest cities in the world. Jericho is another contender, and their permanent habitation began 9 millenniums ago. In the case of Damascus, that's astonishing. Erbil in Iraqi Kurdistan is another example. But anyway, that's I think it was important just to talk about that context. Now, what are the seven wonders of the ancient world? I admittedly didn't know this off the top of my head. I think most people, if they're asked, would name some of these, but not all of them. And this is what they are: the Great Pyramid of Giza, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, the statue of Zeus at Olympia, the Temple of Artemis, the Mausoleum at Halicarnassus, the Colossus of Rhodes, and the Lighthouse of Alexandria. Now, two of these stand out: the Great Pyramid of Giza, because it is the only one still intact, largely intact. It's also the oldest. And the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, it's arguably the most mysterious. With the others, there was definitely historic records that they existed. With the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, there's perhaps more mystery around that than any of the others. Babylon, of course, was a civilization that developed around the Tigris and Euphrates, what is present day Iraq, um, thought to be centered near the present day city of Hilla. Um, in part because of the security situation in the country, and also because of the lack of evidence. It's very difficult to really ascertain the origins of the Hanging Gardens and even what is meant by hanging. So I find that one of the most interesting. It's generally thought to be Nebuchadnezzar II who erected these gardens sometime around the 5th century BC, but the problem is records from the time from invaders, for example, the Persians, make no depiction of this whatsoever. Herodotus, the great Greek historian, doesn't mention it. So you would think that he would have mentioned that at the time. But sometimes that's what history does. So it could be that the Hanging Gardens were even older and they'd already been in disarray, hence not worth talking about by the time Herodotus visited. There are examples of this. When Marco Polo visited China, he made no mention of the Great Wall. By that point, they were about, well, over 1,000 years old and in ruins. Hence, he didn't. He either didn't see it or he didn't feel it was noteworthy at that time. Now, the other five, the statue of Zeus at Olympia, the Temple of Artemis, the Mausoleum at Halicarnassus, the Colossus of Rhodes, and the Lighthouse of Alexandria, are all impressive in their own way. There was an interesting BBC documentary on this, narrated by Pierce Brosnan. It's quite old now. It's, I'm assuming, from the 1990s because of a few giveaways and that, but it goes into quite good details about each of these individual sites, and they would have all been impressive in their own way. The present day Lincoln Memorial, erected in the 1920s, was based on the statue of Zeus, and the Lincoln Memorial, which is a pretty big statue, is only half the size of what Zeus would have been. Many of these were lost in earthquakes or various invasions. I've only been to one of these sites, and that is Rhodes Harbour. And there was nothing there, of course, because the statue is widely believed to have either been destroyed in an earthquake or to have collapsed during invasion. It is interesting that there are possible plans to rebuild the statue at Rhodes, a statue at Rhodes, which with today's technology is very feasible. Um, I think anything can be done nowadays. It just comes down to issues like taxpayers approve and which idea gets approved. Certainly, the technology that we have today allows modern architects to do things that wouldn't have been possible for the ancients. Because in those days, for example, the structure of buildings entirely relied on the outer shell. Today, we have the whole concept of putting a skeletal frame, which means that modern skyscrapers, for instance, the outer shell is often very thin, very weak, because the core of the building line is in the core itself, not based on the walls. There's a few things that are interesting about this. I've heard some people say, I actually posted this on my timeline, and an African American guy suggested that they were Eurocentric. Another friend from Portugal debated that point. I'm not sure that they're Eurocentric because two of those sites are in an African country, and one of them is in the Middle East. So I think what we can say is it is classical centered. Um, One thing that's notable about this, and I'd wondered about this one, but I think there is an explanation. One thing that is notable, there is an absence of the Great Wall of China, there is an absence of Stonehenge, there's an absence of the Petra complex in Jordan, there's an absence of the Great Zimbabwe complex, the ancient city, walled city in present day Zimbabwe, um, Machu Picchu, the Nazca Lines. These are all also ancient foundations, but none of them make an appearance in the Seven Wonders. I think it's because the Seven Wonders of the ancient world came about from the Greek states, the philosophers and writers of the Greek states. And to be fair, and this is a point my Portuguese friend made, um, it's not entirely fair to judge a civilization based on what they didn't know. So you could say it's Eurocentric or classical centered, but they didn't know of the Great Wall of China. So the entire known world to them was concentrated in a certain place. Um, there are also sites in ancient Rome that aren't included, the Colosseum. But of course, when this became a concept, that was a contemporary building. It was a modern building. Indeed, the Colosseum was only built in the first century, so comparatively, it's modern compared to these. The Great Pyramid was already 2,000 years old when the nearest example, which I believe was the statue of Zeus, was completed. So this certainly provokes a lot of interest. It has throughout history. In my lifetime, I definitely want to see the Great Pyramid. That is a must. I've always had difficulty with intense heat, so that would be the one thing holding me back, perhaps. Um, and I just want to leave an open question. If we were to devise a list of wonders of the modern world, and I think it would almost inevitably have to precede seven, what would they be? What do we define as a wonder? If, in this sense, a wonder is something that people come to marvel at, that is world famous, then there might be some interesting choices. I mean, could Hollywood be considered a modern wonder? Some people might scoff of that, but it's world famous. It's it's a unique place, so it could arguably be a wonder of the modern world. And by modern, I mean, let's say post-Renaissance. There's other famous sites, incidentally, that aren't there that are Renaissance, the Leaning Tower of Pisa, and others. One thing that is very important is the UN has, of course, World Heritage Sites, and one of the biggest threats to that is man, war, armed conflict. We've seen what ISIS do and have done wherever they take hold, and that is one of the biggest tragedies of war. Of course, human life is very important, but as the film Monuments Men show, when culture is destroyed, you're erasing history, and that's what's so despicable about what ISIS does. But wherever there is an ugly side to human nature, there is also a positive side, and there are good people who are working tirelessly to recreate models of these structures. It shouldn't have to come to that, but if it did, so that there'd be a possibility they could be reconstructed. Um, but it just shows their utter lack of intellectual argument that they have, that they destroy this sort of heritage. There was a famous incident in Afghanistan where the Taliban blew up the ancient Buddhas. Um, there's other wonders of the ancient world. I didn't even mention the giant statue, the giant Buddha at Leshan, I believe, in central China. There's many large Buddha statues, but it's one of the oldest. Um, wonders of the modern world. The Motherland statue in Russia, very impressive. I believe it's the largest statue, the Statue of Liberty for that matter. Paris has no shortage of examples. The Louvre. Um, skyscrapers, certainly some skyscrapers would have to be there. I would include both the Empire State Building and the Chrysler Building for being pioneering buildings. Um, Burj Khalifa, despite its dubious foundations, despite the treatment of workers in the Gulf, it is an impressive building and it would definitely have to be there. So, this is a very interesting subject. What do you think should be included among modern great wonders? Possibly Silicon Valleys, possibly, in fact, I would argue almost certainly anything to do with science and technology because they do define the modern era. Let me know your thoughts. And again, I'm sorry the sound quality isn't wonderful, but hopefully it will be audible enough to listen to this video. I'll leave it there. Thanks for watching.